Good morning.
Morning.
Oh, everybody has a case of the Mondays this morning. Time is now 8:03 a.m. Today's date is February 27, 2023. This is the time and place for a publicly noticed legislative work session of the Montana Public Service Commission. Would my colleagues join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you, commissioners. I would note that Commissioner O'Donnell is online this morning. Commissioner Pinocci, Vice President Fielder, and myself are present in the Bollinger Room. Commissioner Bukacek should be joining us shortly. So we do have quorum. Montana Public Service Commission welcomes public comment on any matter that may be on today's agenda or any other matter that is within the commission's jurisdiction. Are there any public commenters in the room? Seeing none, are there any public commenters online? Seeing none, I would note for the record that Commissioner Bukacek has now joined us. We have no public comment. Let's move straight into our legislative work session. Who's going to handle?
Mr. President, if you'd like, we can proceed in the order shown on the agenda, or we can proceed in ascending bill number order.
Why don't we go ahead and proceed in the manner shown on the agenda?
Right. Very well. Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, commissioners. First up would be House Bill 729. House Bill 729 is a very short, simple bill, should be included in your meeting materials for this morning. It consists of 3 sections, the first of which is a new section of Montana Code that would allow the commission to approve cost effectiveness criteria for certain advanced conductor projects that may be placed into a utilities rate base, under Title 69, Chapter 3, Part 7. Now, the new Section 1 does establish some criteria as a threshold matter for what an advanced conductor is or what it can mean. Notably, it is a definition that can apply to both transmission and distribution projects. But the importance of this bill is that it slides that new section into Title 69, Chapter 3, Part 7. And Part 7 of Chapter 3 deals with certain investments in efficiency and demand side management on the part of a utility. And when a utility makes that sort of investment under Part 7, it is eligible to ask the commission for an additional 2% rate of return on the investment in that particular resource. So this bill, as I understand it, is designed to incentivize investment in advanced conductor projects by allowing utilities to come in and ask the commission for an up to 2% adder on top of what is the utility's normally approved rate of return. So the codification instruction is Section 2. That's important, but I've already covered it. Of course, this act would be effective on passage and approval. My understanding is that we've had a couple of commissioners at least working with the sponsor of this bill, Representative Galloway, primary sponsor of this bill. And we have, in fact, already had some back and forth with the sponsor of the bill and Trevor Graff from Legislative Services at Commissioner Pinocci's request to talk through some potential amendments that are not going to, in my mind, change the spirit or intent of the bill, but to make it a little bit clearer how this fits in with the rest of Part 7. And so, Mr. President, as I understand it, the commission, or at least Commissioner Pinocci, is prepared to make a motion this morning to support House Bill 729. It is up for a hearing later this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Of course, we do also have a contested case hearing this afternoon. So I think if the commission decides to go that route, it would be prudent to designate someone to appear on behalf of the commission and speak. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have, but just to be clear, the recommendation at this point, consistent with Commissioner Pinocci's desire here, that we would support the House Bill 729 with some minor amendments to improve clarity.
Is there a motion, Commissioner Pinocci?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion to have the Public Service Commission support House Bill 729. Thank you, Mr. President.
Is there a second?
Motion, Mr. President.
All right, Vice President Fielder has seconded the motion. Discussion, Commissioner Pinocci.
Thank you, Mr. President. Returning from NARUC in Washington, D.C., electrical grid supply is a huge issue across the nation and was a big topic. How it was discussed was advanced reconductoring. And for the general public, this really means to replace power lines. A conductor is a power line. Advanced conductoring is really very interesting right now because transmission lines, some of them are reaching the maximum that they can carry. So to rebuild the structures to carry a much heavier line is expensive. It requires permitting, which can take years. And advanced conductoring, the high performance power lines can carry twice the energy of a line that's the same size. This could save billions in permitting delays and cost, which is usually transferred to the ratepayer. More importantly, the advanced conductor can cut line loss by a third. And it also has advancements where it doesn't sag, which is a tremendous problem. They talked about the grid coming down, causing millions of dollars of damage because of a sagged line. And if we can cut back on sagging, this could save millions potentially. More importantly, the technology now is where we can run fiber optics in the core of the line and do a check on how the line is performing at any time a power company wants to. Very few of these lines have been put in. None have been put in Montana yet. So the benefits are just across the board: energy savings, energy efficiency, safety, fire safety. The cost of fires to power line failure is in the billions alone just in California. Montana, we just recently had a serious fire in Denton, Montana. No one was killed, but millions of dollars of damage. So I have high hopes that this will be a vote and a support of a legislature that fits our energy efficiency docket. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Commissioner Pinochi. Additional discussion, Vice President Fielder.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I guess this would be a question for Lucas, based on the description you gave, Lucas. Am I to understand that this would enable the commission or the company to ask for up to a 2% adder, up to a 2% adder on the investment of the advanced conductor work, or on their entire investment in a rate case?
Thank you for the question, Vice President Fielder. I think it's important to clarify that it is geared toward the advanced conductor project. So the commission, in establishing the criteria for what is a cost-effective advanced conductor project in rule, would provide the parameters of what satisfies the criteria for cost effectiveness and what would therefore be qualifying for up to 2% additional rate of return.
Okay. Follow up, Mr.
Follow up.
Given that the commission will have to make decisions based on what is allowed when dockets are open before us or cases are open before us, do you see any potential problem with the commission endorsing legislation at this point that we may have to later implement? Is there any real issue with that you can foresee?
Vice President Fielder, President Brown, I don't see any particular issues with this bill as crafted, because it does still leave the commission with discretion to set the parameters, those cost-effective criteria, which will require some rulemaking. But at this point, you're not passing judgment on any particular type of conductor or any question of fact that may later be in dispute about whether any particular product meets the definitions that are outlined in the statute and that the commission might set through its own rulemaking.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I just want to say, while I've got the floor here, that I appreciate Commissioner Pinochi's tremendous efforts on this piece of legislation. I know he's been working hard on this whole idea for probably a couple years now, or almost a couple years, and looks like a nice, clean piece of legislation. So I will be supporting his motion.
Thank you, Vice President Fielder. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you. Probably for Lucas also. Lucas, in what you just said, I think you used the word adder on there. Does this have any conflicting problems potential with the recently passed legislation from last session to prohibit the commission from imposing adders?
Mr. President, Commissioner O'Donnell, that's a great question. And adder is probably imprecise term in this particular context. The bill that was passed last session prohibits an adder that reflects the cost of a externality that is not reflected in current regulation or statute. So in this context, we're referring to the rate of return that the company can earn. I do believe that as a matter of statutory interpretation, the adoption of this bill, House Bill 729, would not conflict with the prior legislation dealing with externalities.
Thank you. Follow up, Mr. President.
Follow up.
So this would be a 2% additional rate of return solely upon the investment that they would make in these repurposing the lines or repowering the lines?
Mr. President, Commissioner O'Donnell, I would say yes, but with some qualifications. It's up to 2%. It remains the commission's discretion to determine what that amount should be. And it also remains your discretion to define the criteria for what becomes a cost-effective advanced conductor project.
Thank you. But just to clarify, it's not up to 2% rate increase on the general rate, on the overall rate. It's just for this particular project.
Mr. President, Commissioner O'Donnell, that's correct. It is tailored to a specific project. Of course, anytime you increase the rate of return for the utility on any element of its rate base, that increases the overall revenue requirement that has to get passed on to consumers. I think the idea here, however, is that by establishing cost effectiveness criteria, you're evaluating what the long-term cost savings will be for those ratepayers by virtue of implementing this advanced conductor.
And one more question, please. Would this have any effect upon the Northwestern rate case as it exists, as is filed with us right now?
Mr. President, Commissioner O'Donnell.
I see no effective date on the, it says effective date is on passage and approval. I didn't know if that would have any effect. That's the reason for my question.
Mr. President, Commissioner O'Donnell, I don't believe it would have any effect. You're correct that it is effective on passage and approval. So as soon as this bill, if it makes its way through the legislative session and is signed by the governor, then in fact, utilities could start using it. But as of right now, the parameters of Northwestern's current general rate case are well established, and I don't believe that this bill would come into play as part of that rate case.
Thank you.
Additional discussion, questions? Commissioner Pinocci.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to ask to be excused 3 o'clock to speak on the bill. Mr. Hamilton brought up having someone designated for that. Thank you.
Additional comments or questions? All right, all those in favor of Commissioner Pinocci's motion to have the commission support House Bill 729 signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, motion carries. Commissioner Pinocci, I will designate you to be the commission representative at the 3 o'clock hearing, and you will be excused from our contested case today. All right, next bill, Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. President. Commissioners, next up is House Bill 753. Primary sponsor on that is Representative Schillinger. It consists of 4 sections, through 2 of which would be, well, excuse me, 1 of which would be a new section incorporated into Montana Code annotated. That requires the Department of Environmental Quality to consider repurposing coal ash beneficial use in approval decisions made under Title 75, Chapter 8, Part 100, which is a section of code that deals with coal-fired generating unit remediation. So this bill would not directly require the commission to do anything, since it is directed at the Department of Environmental Quality. It is incorporated as part of that Title 75, Chapter 8, instead of Title 69. I would also note that this bill was heard in the House Natural Resources Committee last Friday, and it appears tabled on a vote of 13-2. But that is the update for now on House Bill 753. I'd be happy to answer any questions the commission may have.
Questions?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we're in light of the fact that it has been, it was tabled yesterday, or I believe, or Saturday, by the committee. Commissioner Pinocci and I have been in very extended conversation with many of the members on that panel and the bill author, and there is going to be effort, we believe, to reconsider the bill by that committee this afternoon. So I would move for the commission to approve the House Bill 753.
All right, we have a motion to approve House Bill 753. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and second. Discussion. I presume Commissioner O'Donnell will probably want to speak to your motion.
Thank you. The discussion on Friday in front of the committee was very frustrating in that, and I don't have a whole lot of experience testifying in front of committees, but proponents get up and say their thing, and then opponents give their thing, and there really is no occasion for any cross-questioning or any of that to shed light on the testimony of opponents. And Commissioner Pinocci and I did note very strongly that there were some, how shall we say this, significant inaccuracies in incongruencies on the testimony of opponents that we have attempted to clarify with members of that committee, and that leads us to believe that we have significant support for reconsideration of this bill. We feel it is a very important bill, and I did explain the nexus of the Public Service Commission to this bill is that we have no authority, of course, over remediation efforts by any non-regulated utility, not regulated in Montana. However, Northwestern Energy is in a position where it has coal ash remediation responsibilities and is regulated by the Montana Public Service Commission. And at some point, they will ask to recover from ratepayers the cost of this remediation. And our standard is prudency of those expenditures. And Commissioner and I feel very, very strongly, and maybe others, that prudency standard is certainly not meant by spending probably $100 million of ratepayers' dollars to just put something in a hole in the ground when it has beneficial uses to benefit the entire state of Montana, the treasury of the state of Montana, the fiscal condition of the local community, which would be Colstrip, and the Rosebud County on there. We feel this is extremely important and would greatly support the passage of this bill. Once it gets to the Senate, the purpose is just to get the bill from the House to the Senate, and there it can be worked on more, and any amendments that might address some of the testimony from the opponents. We look forward to having that opportunity. So we feel that this is very important, Mr. President.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. Discussion. Is there a motion?
I wanted to ask a question for
Vice President Fielder.
I'd like to ask a question of Commissioner O'Donnell, if I may. He was at the hearing, I understand, last week, correct, Commissioner O'Donnell?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Did Department of Environmental Quality take a position on this bill?
Thank you for the question. The answer is no. The DEQ representative was there for informational purposes only. It did not speak.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, has our agency had any kind of conversation with DEQ about this bill, like staff to staff or anything like that? Of any, Commissioner O'Donnell, do you know if any conversations has happened? The reason I ask is I hesitate to venture into another agency's code. This is Title 75, and that's DEQ, not PSC. So as you know, I'm a little bit hesitant to venture into that. And I just like to know if we've had any kind of formal discussions with them about whether they would find it troublesome if we were to weigh in on this as a proponent or opponent.
I'll start with Commissioner O'Donnell if you want to respond to that, and then I'll call on Commissioner Pinocci also. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Well, the question was twofold, whether that I have any knowledge of communications or whether staff has. So can I get Lucas to add to this if he has any information?
Sure, Lucas.
President Brown, to my knowledge, no one in legal division has had any communication with DEQ, and I don't believe anyone within the regulatory division has either. Okay.
So my answer to this is that as far as I know, there has been no communication between the departments. And I would mention that Commissioner Fielder did mention to me about the Title 75 and about the territoriality, I guess, of different agencies, which I respect. I read a great deal of Section 75 and find that there is not an invasion of territory, but an area that I just mentioned in terms of where our different authorities merge on this issue. I would like to make one other point, Mr. Chairman, and that is that not only would I think that ratepayers would be faced with probably $100 million a cleanup responsibility, but if securitization is imposed on this, then it would become $100 million obligation of the ratepayers of the state, all of which would indicate that money just thrown into a hole in the ground is an absolute waste, and all of us as public servants are committed to the best use of ratepayers or shareholder taxpayers' money, Mr. President.
Commissioner Pinocci.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to get right to Commissioner Fielder's question, and then I'd like to follow up with more information. But first, her question. Originally, the bill was designed to have the Public Service Commission oversee coal ash. The point of view was NARUC has a national board on coal, which Commissioner O'Donnell and myself serve on. It's called Clean Coal. So we felt to rise to the responsibility of trying to make a difference, we'd introduce a bill and have the Public Service Commission oversee how we deal with coal ash to beneficial use. This would fit NARUC's mission of clean coal very well. The problem we ran into is we would have to take on the responsibility of making sure that we would meet requirements that wouldn't leave liability on top of the Public Service Commission of the state of Montana. In discussion directly with DEQ and Trevor, the bill draft specialist, if you will, and the sponsor, Representative Schellinger, we decided to remove the Public Service Commission from this responsibility. We would just leave it with DEQ, who has full responsibility to oversee coal ash now. An example is when they have to bury it, DEQ has to work very closely with Talon, the company who wants it buried, to make sure all the regulations and liability concerns are met. So in reality, DEQ handles that now. So we felt we would simply pull the responsibility away from the Public Service Commission, which I said I would support fully because I still meet the goals of NARUC clean coal to encourage beneficial use and avoid burying it in Montana at all. The bill quite simply says if a price can be met for beneficial use that's similar or less than burying it, the law says it has to be used. I think it's a very good bill. It fits clean coal with NARUC. It also DEQ's message of being responsible for our environment. Well, clearly, if we don't bury it in Montana and we can ship it out for beneficial use, is best for the environment. If we can create 150 jobs, at the same time understanding that we buy coal ash for concrete from China after we borrow money from them, pay interest on that money, turn around and give them the same money we pay interest to. Well, I'd like Montana to raise their hand and strengthen the US dollar. So that is the best way I can answer that question. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Commissioner Pinochi. Vice President Fielder, you have the floor, if you will.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do appreciate the efforts that have gone into this. I'm hesitant still to have our agency weigh in as a proponent at this point, given the 13-2 vote to table it in committee. It seems like the committee has found some real issues with this, and I would like to have those discussions with maybe our executive director, talking to his counterpart over at DEQ to start that conversation about. I mean, I agree with the concept. I think it's a great concept, but I'd like to see more collaborative work done with this agency and the other agency that's involved here. So I'm going to offer a substitute motion and we'll see if that will go. But I will offer a substitute motion to go ahead and monitor the legislation and designate Commissioner O'Donnell as the agency's informational witness and have our staff talk with the appropriate counterparts at DEQ.
Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Bukacek has seconded. Discussion.
Mr. President.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you. And that would be, acceptable to me. I'd rather have us endorse it. But the reality is that it's today or no day on the whole thing. And the reason it was 13-2, as I've spoken with a couple of members of the committee, was that it was viewed, and some of the opponents couched their language as if this is the attempt by one company to force into negotiations with Talon, to force Talon to be in negotiations with them. That is not the case at all. The purpose of this bill is to establish an ethic of the state of Montana to say that coal ash needs to be remediated. It has nothing whatever to do with any particular company. That was the issue. I'm told that members of the committee were swayed upon. As I said, there was no real effective way to counter some of the arguments that sounded very reasonable. But as I mentioned before, they were factually incorrect. Over the weekend, Commissioner Pinochi and I have reached out to members correcting some of the misinformation that was promulgated by opponents, and we feel that that it has a chance. I would respect Commissioner Fielder's attitude on this. I really do. But I would still ask the commission to endorse this bill, and we can make all sorts of changes to it. And even if after a lot of interagency discussion with many people, deeper delved into it, when it comes to the Senate, we can either withdraw the support at that time, or modify it, or anything else of that nature. But basically, this is such an incredibly timely situation that I don't think there's any time to monitor it. I would really really hope the only hope that this bill has, I think, is for this commission to endorse it, Mr. President.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. Commissioner Bukacek.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the utmost respect for the sponsor of this bill and also for the intent of the bill and the efforts that have gone into it. I've done quite a bit of study myself on the, reusing, utilization, the benefits of repurposing, but I've also studied similar legislature in other states, and there have been significant problems with legislation in the other states. And so I'm gonna vote for the motion to monitor
All right,
till there's a formal study done.
Vice President Fielder.
Mr. President, I would like to offer that to Commissioner O'Donnell that nothing's ever quite dead in the legislature until they sine die. So if there's a way to pull more support together and come to agreements with the other agency and with legislators, there's ways to revive bills. So I know that the timing is critical right now, but it's probably not quite as critical as you think. There are ways.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is great discussion, and I think that Commissioner Fielder is asking the right questions and good questions. However, I do have some answers, and I wanted to answer the second part of her question separately from the first answer I gave her. So the first problem with testimony to this bill was the hearing was to start at 3 o'clock, but the legislature ran to nearly 5 o'clock, and the testimony, which I organized. When I say organized testimony, I want to make sure individuals that give testimony don't repeat what other testimony is. And my key testimony had to leave simply because it didn't start at 3. It started closer to 4:30. The opposition was incorrect. They still felt that the Public Service Commission was going to oversee this bill, which had changed. We changed the language. So the opposition stood up and said there will be liability issues that we won't be able to handle, and liability will be the main problem. And everybody said they respected the bill sponsor, but they were behind on what had transpired. The responsibility did not lay with the Public Service Commission. It continues with the DEQ. So that testimony against the bill was completely incorrect. There was nothing I could do because opponents get to go second, and no one called me to the podium to ask me the question. So I had to get with everyone in the committee after the hearing, and they're like, wow, we didn't know that. So they're going to make a motion, as I understand today, to reconsider with the facts that liability is met with DEQ, who handles liability now. It'll stay with them, and they have all that responsibility. They will be responsible to approve any company that wants to do beneficial use. There is no risk because it can only go forward if they can do a similar price to Berrien or less, and liability issues are met. So I am asking for us to support this bill based on that information, and the flaw that I just didn't have that key testimony because the hearing was delayed an hour and a half. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, I'm going to call the question. This is non-debatable. All right, all those in favor of Commissioner or Vice President Fielder's motion to amend signify by saying aye.
Aye. Is it amend so that monitors?
Just a point of order, Mr. President. It was a substitute motion.
Substitute motion.
Yes.
All right, thank you for the clarification.
And the motion, if I can repeat it, was to have the PSC monitor the bill, designate Commissioner O'Donnell as the agency's primary informational witness, and have our staff, I presume our executive director, speak with a counterpart over at DEQ about the legislation, see if we can resolve some of the misunderstandings and hopefully see this bill revived.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. All those in favor of the substitute motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying no.
No.
Motion carries. All right, Mr. Hamilton, we are a bit time limited here, so please proceed. Oh,
Morning, Mr. President, Commissioners. I'm going to take House Bill 643, which is a bill to amend the net metering statutes. House Bill 643 is sponsored by Representative Joshua Kastmeyer. House Bill 643 amends the definition of net metering by striking existing limitations on the fuel that can be used in a net metering project. It's currently solar, wind, or hydropower that would be stricken. And then the maximum size of a net metering project is increased from 50 kilowatts to 100 kilowatts. The bill also modifies a legislative finding regarding net metering, that net metering is in the public interest and that it should be promoted. It removes that language and just says that the legislature finds that net metering should be net metering encourages private investment in renewable energy resources, stimulates Montana's economic growth, and enhances continued diversification of the energy resources used in Montana. The bill would require the commission to determine whether or not net metering projects should be metered separately for their production. So the commission would need to determine whether net metering customers should have one meter that measures their consumption and another meter that measures their facility's production. The bill establishes a cap on the amount of net metering that can be implemented in a utility service area to 5% of forecasted summer peak load until the commission establishes a separate rate classification for customer generators. The bill requires the utility to complete a cost of service study before September 30th, 2025. And then it requires the commission to use the results of that cost of service study to establish the separate rate classifications for customer generators. That is the basic summary of the bill, Mr. President. I don't have huge concerns with the bill. The one thing I would note is that the commission doesn't have a lot of flexibility. And so that if for some reason a contested case process surrounding the utility's cost of service study indicated that the utility failed to meet its burden of proof, or other interveners demonstrated through their testimony that the cost of service study doesn't justify a separate rate classification, the bill still seems to require the commission to nonetheless establish a separate rate classification. So that would be the one concern I would have with the bill, Mr. President.
So clarification, Mr. Rosequist. So are you recommending that the commission try to amend that bill to address that concern?
I don't have a strong recommendation one way or another. The commission could appear as informational and simply point out to the legislature the impacts of the bill as written and leave it at that. If the commission would like to oppose the bill and for that reason and point out that potential concern to the committee, I'm happy to do that as well.
Vice President Fielder.
Mr. President, I would move that the commission monitor House Bill 643, designate an informational witness, and do point out the issue that Mr. Rosequist has raised here regarding time constraints or the requirements, the lack of flexibility in here, and see if we can work towards an amendment on that, Mr. President.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Discussion.
Mr. President,
Commissioner O'Donnell.
thank you. Question for Will. It looks to me like the only major difference in this bill is under Section 5, number 2. And I'm reading, it says rates established in this section shall not include subsidies from public utility customers who do not use net metering systems, etc. I think this is consistent with the unanimous vote of the commission over 2 years ago on the net metering issue that is the overwhelming feeling of the commission at that time and led to that vote that rooftop solar customers not be subsidized by other ratepayers who do not have those systems. It seems to me that is a major part of the bill. Do you agree? Is my interpretation of that correct?
Mr. President, Commissioner O'Donnell, that is certainly an aspect of the bill. You are correct that this bill amends statutory provisions that were implemented in 2017 that required the utility to conduct a cost benefit study of net metering and then to present that to the commission in a rate case. As you recall, we went through that rate case and the commission found a number of issues with Northwestern's cost benefit study. And the results of that rate case were that the commission was not able to, based on the record, establish a separate rate classification for net metering customers as a result. And that's why I raised the concern I did, because we have actual experience where, notwithstanding the legislature's attempts to encourage an evaluation of the costs and benefits of customer generators and net metering, the process before the commission was not sufficient to allow the commission to reach a conclusion on whether those customers should be put on a separate rate classification. And to the extent that that repeats itself, the commission doesn't want to be boxed into having to do something.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I'm not, I'm not mechanically oriented to the fineries of rate classifications. I think the feeling of the unanimous and very strong feeling of the commission at the time we last voted on this was basically to be summed up by saying net metering customers should buy power from Northwestern should they need to at retail rates. Anything they generate would be generated back at wholesale rates, and any resale back to the system at retail rates would necessarily involve a non-participating customer subsidy of PV owners. And so that was, I don't remember a conversation at the time having to do with rate classes, but only in the terms of how that energy would be billed. And but I guess that was couched in the form of rate classes. But so I would support the motion. I note with some dismay that the peculiarities of wanting a bill to be slightly amended would require, on the face of it, to be an opponent of the bill when 95% of the bill might be supported. It's just an odd situation to be in. But I would, therefore, I would support the motion.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. Additional discussion? I would just pick up where Commissioner O'Donnell left off. And I think that if we send informational staff up to speak to the bill and then we raise a concern about a provision of the bill, there's a high chance that our position will be treated as opposition. And with that being stated is that I think the bill is problematic for the reasons that Mr. Rosequist stated. I'm going to vote for the motion this morning, but if this bill advances, I may move at some future point to change the commission's position on this bill. Additional discussion? All right, all those in favor of the Vice President's motion signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, motion carries. Mr. Rosequist, come talk to me after this about how we're going to deal with the mechanics of this. Okay, the time is now 8:47 a.m.
Mr. President.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Mr. President.
Yes.
No, I just didn't want to say one thing, maybe off the record or on the record. I'm not there to see Mr. Rosequist. We all missed you from the week that you were ill. It's a wonderful pleasure to hear your voice. Thank you, Mr. President.
I would just clarify the record that Mr. Rosequist was not gone a week despite the requests of his bosses to take some time off. So
it seemed like a year.
He is a dedicated public servant. I will say that. No further business to come before the commission. I will adjourn the legislative work session of the state. The time is now 8:48 a.m.